My father signed the papers to sell the ranch on the same afternoon he forgot my name. Except he didn't sign them. That signature was not his, and I was the only person left on earth who could prove it. I know that the way you know the sound of your own front door. For 22 years, my father sent me a postcard every single month, from the drugstore rack in Bandera, Texas, no matter where the army had shipped me. 261 of them, the last time I counted. I know his hand better than I know my own signature, the way his D leaned back like a man tipping his hat, the way his sevens never got the crossbar, the way his letters shook, in the last few years, like a truck idling rough. And the name on that bill of sale shook too. But it shook wrong. It shook careful. A forger's tremor is a steady hand pretending. My father's tremor was a steady heart in a body that was quitting on him. They are not the same thing, and I had 261 postcards that could tell them apart. My name is Claire Dawson. Master Sergeant, retired. 25 years in the United States Army, most of it spent somewhere with a different sky than the one I was born under. And for most of that time, my family had a quiet, comfortable story about who I was, the one who left. The one who mailed postcards and checks and called it love, while somebody else did the real work of staying. Half of that story was true. That was the part that nearly cost me everything. But before I tell you how a drugstore postcard undid a forged sale and a fast-talking developer, and a lie that was 3 years in the making, before I tell you what my father's voice said from a cheap recorder in a gun safe, after he could no longer say my name, you have to go back to the phone call. The one that came on a Tuesday in October, and started with my sister saying, "You don't need to come. There's nothing to do here but wait." I was in my kitchen in Killeen when Dana called. I still keep a place near Post, old habits. She told me our father had taken a turn, which is a thing people say when they don't want to say the word. Alzheimer's had been eating him for 3 years, slow at first, then all at once, and she said the doctors had moved him to comfort care, and there was no point in me driving down, because he wouldn't know me anyway. He hasn't known me in months, she said, and there was something in how she said it a little flat, a little rehearsed that I didn't have a name for yet. It's kinder to remember him how he was. I want to be honest about my sister, because the easy version of this story makes her a monster, and she wasn't. Dana stayed. When our mother died, I was a private at Fort Benning and Dana was 19, and she came home and never really left. When our father started leaving the stove on, Dana was the one who smelled the gas. When he started wandering the county road at night in his socks, Dana was the one the sheriff called. She changed his sheets at 3 in the morning. She sat in the ugly plastic chairs at the neurologist's office and wrote down words like sundowning and aspiration risk. She watched a man who used to throw 80-pound hay bales like they were pillows forget how to button a shirt. I did none of that. I was in Kandahar. I was in Kuwait. I was at a folding table in a plywood building on the other side of the planet, and once a month I put a postcard in an envelope going home, and I told myself that counted. Here's what I sent instead of being there. I sent money, a good chunk of my pay, every month, into the ranch account, because cattle prices are cruel and my father was proud and I knew he'd never ask. I sent postcards to Sophie. No, that's another life. I sent postcards to him, because he sent them to me first, and it was the one language the two of us had always spoken. They started when I shipped out at 18. My father drove me to the Greyhound's station in San Antonio in the dark, and he didn't say much, because he wasn't a man who said much, and when the bus pulled out he lifted 2 fingers off the brim of his hat, and that was the whole goodbye. 2 weeks later, in the misery of basic training, I got a postcard. A picture of the Alamo, of all the worn-out things. On the back, in that leaning hand, fence on the north line is holding. Roan mares in foal. Nothing here you need to worry about. Dad. And that was the deal, unspoken for 22 years. Once a month, wherever I was, a cheap postcard from the drugstore rack. The fence. The weather. The stock. A calf that made it. A calf that didn't. Come home when you can. Never a word about missing me. He didn't have those words, but the postcard itself was the word. It meant you are still my daughter, and there is still a place, and I am still here, keeping it. The postcards mattered more than I ever told him. There was a night at a combat hospital in Kandahar. I won't tell you the whole of it, because some of it isn't mine to tell, and the rest I've spent a long time putting back in the box it came out of, but it was a bad night. The kind where you run out of the things you're supposed to run out of, and start improvising with the things you're not. And by morning I was sitting on a HESCO barrier with my boots in the dust. Not entirely sure I wanted to keep doing any of it. A specialist came out and handed me the mail, because the mail found you even there, even on the worst mornings, and that was the miracle of it. And there was a postcard. A photograph of the San Antonio Riverwalk, of all the ordinary places, somewhere I'd walked 100 times and never once looked at. On the back, dry spell finally broke. Creeks running. That roan mare threw a filly ugly little thing, mean as her mother. Fence on the north lines holding. Come home when you can. Dad. I read the fence on the north lines holding, and I sat on that barrier and I laughed until I nearly cried. Because 8,000 miles away my father was telling me the fence was up, and I understood he was really telling me the world still had a shape, that there was still a north line and a creek and a mean little filly, and a place where none of what I'd just done had happened. He never knew about that night. He never knew there'd been a barrier or a bad morning. He just knew it was the 4th of the month, and he owed his daughter a card. But that card is the reason I put my boots back on. So when Dana says the postcards were me phoning it in from paradise, she's right about what they cost me a stamp and wrong about what they were, which was the thing that kept me alive to send anything at all. They were his hand on my shoulder from the other side of the earth. He just didn't have a way to say that, so he said the fence was holding, and I learned to hear I love you. Keep going inside the fence is holding. And after 22 years the two sentences meant exactly the same thing to me. I kept every one of them in a cigar box that used to hold his Swisher Sweets. Dana, I found out much later, threw hers away as a girl. The few he sent when she was at nursing school. Because to Dana a postcard was proof of a father who couldn't be bothered to pick up a phone. She and I had grown up in the same house and learned two completely opposite languages, and neither of us ever knew it. So when she told me not to come, it's kinder to remember him how he was, I almost listened. That's the part I have to live with. I almost stayed in Killeen and let a postcard be my goodbye, the way I'd let a postcard be everything else. Then I looked at the last one he'd sent me. It had come in July, 3 months before, right at the edge of when the disease took the rest of him. And it wasn't like the others. And it wouldn't leave me alone. Got in the truck and I drove to Bandera. The Dawson place is 1,100 acres of hill country an hour northwest of San Antonio, cedar and live oak and a creek that runs when it feels like it. And a house my grandfather built that my father never once thought about leaving. When I turned in at the cattle guard, the first thing I saw was a sign staked at the end of the drive. A developer's sign. Coming soon, Cedar Hollow Ranch Estate. With a phone number and an artist's drawing of houses where the roan mare's pasture is. My father was still alive. And someone was already selling his grave. Inside, the house smelled like a hospital, that sweet chemical smell that means someone is being kept comfortable while they leave. My father was in a rented bed in the front room, where the good light is, and he was so small. He looked at me with a pleasant, empty courtesy, the way you'd look at a nice stranger, and he said, "Are you the girl from the county?" And I said, "Yes, Dad. I'm the girl from the county," because Dana was right about one thing. There was no version of the truth I could give him that he could hold. I sat with him a while before Dana knew I was really staying. I pulled one of the ugly plastic chairs up next to the rented bed and held his hand, which was all bone now, the hand that used to crush mine when I was small, and he'd pretend I'd won the arm wrestle. He didn't know me. But at one point he turned his head and looked out the window at the pasture, at the light going long and gold over the grass the way it does out there in the late afternoon, and he said, very clearly, in his own voice. The first whole sentence I'd heard from him. Somebody needs to check the north line before dark. Just that. Then he was gone again, back behind the pleasant courtesy, asking if I was the girl from the county. But for 4 seconds my father had been in the room, not the disease. Him, and the very last thing his breaking brain reached for on its own was the fence. The north line. Keeping the place. He'd been keeping that place his whole life, and he was going to keep it right up until the wiring gave out. And it undid me a little, because I thought, he doesn't know his own daughter's face, but he knows the fence needs checking. That was the shape of the man. And that was what they were selling out from under him while he lay there worrying, in the only 4 clear seconds he had left, about whether the north line would hold till morning. Dana came out of the kitchen drying her hands, and she stopped when she saw me, and for just a second something crossed her face that wasn't welcome. Then she covered it. "You came," she said. "I told you not to." Rick was there too, Dana's husband, a big soft man with a salesman's laugh, and I would learn about $400,000 of debt from a construction outfit that had gone under in the spring. He shook my hand too hard. "Master Sergeant," he said like it was a punchline. "Good of you to make it." He'd driven up in a truck that cost more than the down payment on most houses. And he talked about the land sale the way a man talks about a horse that's finally going to pay off loud, and often, and to anyone in the room who'd hold still. I didn't say much. I've found that the man doing all the talking about money is usually the man who's run out of it. I licked my thumb and turned another page. There was a stack of papers on the dining table. There's always a stack of papers. I'm the kind of person who reads them. 25 years of the army teaches you that the paper is where the truth lives or dies. And I have a habit, an old one, of licking my thumb before I turn a page, the way you do when you've counted a lot of manifests. So while Dana made coffee and Rick made noise, I read. A general power of attorney, giving Dana full authority over my father's affairs. Dated 18 months back, right around when he could still hold a pen but not, I suspected, understand what one was for. A bill of sale, nearly finalized, transferring the entire ranch to Cedar Hollow Ranch Estates LLC for a number that was low, criminally low, the kind of number you take when you need cash fast and don't care what a thing is worth. And a letter, typed, signed by my father, expressing his heartfelt wish that his daughter Dana receive the proceeds of the sale in gratitude for her years of care. And on the power of attorney, and on the bill of sale, and on that letter, in 3 places, was my father's signature. I looked at it a long time. I licked my thumb and I turned back to it twice. That leaning D. Those crossbarless 7s. The tremor. The tremor was wrong. I had 261 examples of my father's shaking hand, and his shake was a live thing. It wandered. It dragged. It got worse when he was tired and better after his coffee. It was the honest failure of a real nervous system. This shake was drawn. It was a careful hand adding a wobble on purpose, the way you'd draw a cartoon of an old man's writing. Whoever made it had studied him. But they hadn't gotten 22 postcards of study. I had. I didn't say any of that. 25 years teaches you something else. Too, when you spot the enemy moving, you do not shout so they know you've seen them. You go quiet. You gather. You count. How's the account? I asked, easy, pouring myself coffee. Cattle doing all right. Dana's shoulders went stiff. It's handled, Claire. Everything's handled. You've been gone. You don't have to come in at the end and audit us. That night I sat at my father's roll-top desk while the oxygen machine hissed in the next room, and I quietly pulled what I could. The ranch account I'd been paying into for years was down to almost nothing, drained in a dozen transfers over 18 months. Chased down, I'd find out, into the hole under Rick's dead company. The cattle were mostly sold already, and the sale of the land itself was set to close in 9 days. 9 days, And 1,100 acres my grandfather cleared by hand would belong to a man who wanted to name a cul-de-sac after the mayor. I understood, sitting there, that Dana hadn't just given up on our father. She'd been quietly dismantling him for a year and a half. And Rick had needed her to. In the morning I found Manny Ruiz down at the barn, doing work nobody was paying him to do anymore. Manny had worked the Dawson place for 31 years. My father hired him at 17 and never once treated him like anything but a partner, and Manny had kept coming even after the cattle got sold out from under him. Because he told me, somebody's got to feed the 2 horses they didn't bother to sell, and it wasn't going to be them. He took his hat off when he saw me, the way he'd done my whole life and the way I'd never once been able to talk him out of. And when I asked him quietly, the way you ask a man a thing he's been waiting to be asked what had been happening here, he told me. He told me about the day, about a year back, when Rick drove out with a folder and Dana walked their father through some papers for the bank, and how Walt signed where they pointed because by then he'd sign anything you put a pen near, and how Manny had stood in the doorway not knowing it was his place to speak, and had regretted it every day since. He told me about the cattle trucks coming at odd hours. He told me Rick had asked him, twice, whether the old man ever said anything about a safe, and how Manny had looked him in the eye and said no, which was a lie, because Manny knew about the green safe in the tack room. Everybody who'd ever worked that ranch knew about it. But Manny didn't like the way Rick's mouth moved when he asked. Your daddy was a good man, Manny said, and his voice did a thing, and he put his hat back on so I wouldn't see his face, which is a thing men of a certain kind do. He talked about you. All the time. Every time one of them cards went out, he'd tell me my girl's in such and such place now, keeping folks safe. He was proud of you, Miss Claire. Whatever they told you. Whatever they're fixing to tell you in that lawyer's office. He was proud of you, and he was scared of them, and he was too proud to say the second part out loud. I have had a lot of witnesses in my life sign a lot of statements. Manny Ruiz, in a barn, with his hat back on, is the only one I've ever wanted to salute. Let me step out of the story for just a second, because I can't get to what my father did next without asking you something first. Have you ever loved a family from the other side of the world, sent what you could, called when the schedule let you, and then come home to find the people standing closer had already decided your love didn't count? If that's you, tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight. I read them. And if you believe what my father believed, that distance is not the same as not caring, that the people who truly know you can trust you from 10,000 miles away, do me one favor and subscribe. This channel is for the ones who kept faith with their people the only way they had. All right. Let me show you what my father did about all of it years before the fog, back when he could still see the whole board. There was a thing my father used to say, before the fog, that I'd long since filed away as an old man's bluster. Nobody is ever going to sell this place out from under anybody, he'd tell me, jabbing a finger at the dirt. I've seen to that. Drove up to Kerrville and sat with a lawyer about it, years back. I'd say sure, Dad, and change the subject. Because it was the kind of thing men his age say to feel like they've still got a hand on the wheel. Standing in his emptied-out account at midnight, I stopped thinking it was bluster. My father had done something, once, to lock this land down against exactly this day. I just didn't know what he'd done, or where he'd put it. But knowing is not proving. A forged signature that fools a notary and a title company is, on paper, just a signature. To stop that sale, I needed to prove the man in the front room had never signed a thing, and the only man who could tell me how to do that was the same man who could no longer tell me his own name. Except he'd already told me. 3 months ago. On a postcard. I just hadn't understood him yet. My father did not trust banks. He didn't trust computers, or lawyers, or the government, which was a strange thing to raise a soldier. But there it is. What he trusted was a heavy green gun safe bolted to the concrete in the tack room, where he kept his grandfather's shotgun and the deed to the land and, he used to say, anything that matters more than money. He wrote everything down, And then he wrote it down again somewhere else, because he'd learned young that paper burns and memory lies. If there was a truth in that house that could beat a forged signature, it was in that safe. And I didn't have the combination. Dana would have it, through the power of attorney. Which meant I couldn't ask. I went back to the last postcard. I'd brought it with me, in my jacket, because it had been bothering me for 3 months. It had come in July, and it was wrong in a way I couldn't place. The picture was ordinary bluebonnets, the kind they sell 1,000 of. But the message wasn't the fence and the weather. In his worst, latest handwriting, pressing so hard the pen had torn the card in one spot, it said, "Claire, getting foggy up here. Before it all goes, the important things are locked up where they've always been. Combinations the morning you left. You always did get the time wrong. It was 6, not 7. Come home. Dad." I had read it in July and thought it was the disease talking. The fog, the wandering. The morning you left. You always did get the time wrong. I'd folded it up and put it in the box and felt sick and hadn't looked at it again. Now I stood in the tack room at midnight with a flashlight in my teeth, and I understood that my father, feeling the dark come down over him, had done the last clear-headed thing he could think of. He had mailed the combination to his safe to the one person he trusted, coded in a way that only that one person could read. On the cheapest, most overlookable object in the world, a drugstore postcard that his son-in-law would never think twice about. The morning I left, I was 18. He drove me to the San Antonio Greyhound station. The date is burned into me. I've listed it on every enlistment form and re-up for a quarter century. I spun the dial to that date. Month, day, year. It didn't open. I tried it again, slower. Nothing. And I felt the floor start to go, the way it had gone the day the truck ahead of me, no. The way it goes. I stood in the cold tack room and thought, it's the fog. He was already gone in July. There's nothing in here but a shotgun and a dead man's paranoia, and I drove 3 hours to rob a safe on the word of a disease. Then I read the card again. You always did get the time wrong. It was 6, not 7. It was an old argument between us. For 25 years I had told the story of that morning as the 7 a.m. bus, and every time I told it, my father corrected me. 6:14. Claire, I've got the ticket stub. It was 6:14. I thought it was just his stubbornness. It wasn't. He'd kept it because it mattered to him. And now he was handing it to me as a key. Don't use the day you think it was. Use the time I always insisted on. 6:14. I spun the dial. 6:14. And the last number the year. But he'd said the morning you left. And I left at 18. So I tried my birth year plus 18. The handle turned, and the heavy door swung open, and my knees actually gave. And I sat down on the concrete floor of my father's tack room, and I cried in a way I had not cried since I was a child. Inside was not a shotgun. He'd moved that. Inside was a manila envelope, soft with handling, and a small silver voice recorder. The cheap kind, with a sticky note on it in his hand, "Play me." The envelope held the real deed, and a trust, a proper one, drawn up by a lawyer in Kerrville 4 years ago, before the fog, naming me, Claire Marie Dawson, as sole trustee and beneficiary of the Dawson Ranch, with one clause underlined twice in my father's pen: no sale, transfer, or encumbrance of this property shall be valid without the written signature of the trustee. Not the power of attorney. The trustee. Me. And a notarized letter, 4 years old, in which my father, of sound mind, a notary stamp beside his real, honest, wandering signature, stated that he was placing the ranch in trust for Claire because she has spent her life keeping other people's homes safe, and I intend for her to have one of her own to come back to, and I do not want it sold out from under her when I'm gone, by anyone, for any reason. He had seen it coming. 4 years ago, before he forgot how to button a shirt, my father had looked down the road at exactly this, and he had built me a wall. I picked up the recorder. I did not play it yet. My hands weren't steady, and his weren't drawn tremors, and I wanted to be someone he'd be proud of when I heard his voice. So I sat on the floor a while longer, in the cold, holding the last clear thing my father made, and then I put it all back in the envelope, and I drove to Kerrville in the morning to find the lawyer whose name was on the trust. His name was Sam Okafor, a careful man in his 60s who had drawn my father's trust and had been trying, for 2 weeks, to get someone at the ranch to return his calls about the closing he'd heard was scheduled. When I put the trust and the notarized letter on his desk, he read them twice, and then he took off his glasses and rubbed his face, and said the thing lawyers say when they see it, Ms. Dawson, I don't think your sister understands what she's done. Okafor was honest with me, which I've learned to be grateful for in a lawyer. The trust is ironclad, he said. The sale can't legally close without your signature, and it won't. But there's always but I can't make the district attorney move on a forgery in 3 days, and until a court says otherwise, your sister still holds a facially valid power of attorney. She can complicate this for a year. She can tie up the estate. She can make you spend the ranch's worth in legal fees just to keep the ranch. People who forge one document, he said, usually don't stop at one. That night I sat on the porch of my father's house with the recorder in my jacket and the whole hill country dark and enormous in front of me, and I did the math the way I'd been trained to. I could win and still lose. I could prove the forgery, save the land, and spend the next 3 years in courtrooms watching my sister and me salt the earth between us, and at the end have 1,100 acres and no family left to walk them. I thought about my father in the rented bed, worrying about the North Line. I thought about Manny feeding 2 horses nobody would pay him for. And I understood there was no version of the coming week that didn't cost me something I couldn't get back. There's a kind of courage that isn't about whether you're afraid, it's about walking into the thing, knowing exactly what it's going to take from you, and doing it anyway, because the alternative is letting a lie stand. I'd spent 25 years learning that kind. I just never thought I'd have to use it on my own sister. The sale was set to close on a Friday. On Wednesday, Okafor called everyone to his office to review the settlement documents before signing Dana, Rick, and a man named Pruitt from Cedar Hollow, with his own attorney. My father was too far gone to attend, which meant it was just us, and the paper, the way it always comes down to us and the paper in the end. Dana came in like she'd already won. She had the confidence of a woman who has held all the documents for 18 months and never once been asked a question. She slid a folder across the table, her power of attorney, the bill of sale, and that typed letter with the drawn signature. It's all in order, she said. Dad wanted the sale. He wanted me to have the proceeds. It's in writing. Pruitt's attorney nodded. Rick smiled at the table. And for a moment, I'll be honest, the room believed her, because paper spoke and she had a lot of it, and I had a cigar box and a story about handwriting. Okafor looked at me. Miss Dawson, you had something to add. I did not stand up and make a speech. I have never been able to, and my father wouldn't have wanted one. I opened my own folder, and I laid it out the way you lay out a manifest, 1 page at a time in order. This is the deed, I said. And this is a trust, drawn up in this office 4 years ago, before my father was diagnosed, placing the ranch in trust with me as trustee. I set the trust in front of Pruitt's attorney, and I watched him read the underlined clause, and I watched his face change, because a real estate attorney knows exactly what that sentence means. No sale is valid without the trustee's signature. I'm the trustee. I have not signed anything, which means the bill of sale on this table is not a discounted deal. It's a piece of paper worth nothing. Pruitt started to say something. His attorney put a hand on his arm. This, I said, and I laid down the notarized letter, is my father, 4 years ago, in front of a notary, of sound mind, saying in his own words that he did not want this ranch sold, by anyone, for any reason. His signature. His real one. Dana's voice was tight. He wasn't. The newer documents are what matter. The power of attorney supersedes. A power of attorney, Okafor said gently, cannot override a trust the grantor executed while competent. And it cannot authorize the trustee's signature. It never could. Then all we have is signature on the sale, Dana said, and she pushed the bill of sale forward like it was a shield. Right there. He signed it. And that was the moment I'd been quiet for. No, I said. He didn't. I put my own folder's last pages on the table. Not the trust. The postcards. A dozen of them. Fanned out. 22 years of my father's honest, wandering hand. I'm going to ask the county to bring in a forensic document examiner, I said. And when they do, they're going to compare the signature on that bill of sale to 261 samples of my father's actual handwriting. Sent to me. Postmarked. Dated from the drugstore in town. Every month for 22 years. And they're going to find what I found. That the tremor on your bill of sale is drawn. It's a steady hand copying a sick one. It is a forgery. I looked at her. You studied his signature, Dana. But you didn't have what I had. You threw yours away. The room went very quiet, the kind of quiet where the building gets loud. The air handler kicked on somewhere above the ceiling tiles. Pruitt's pen tapped the table once and then went still. Down the hall a phone rang twice and nobody picked it up. Then Pruitt's attorney closed his folder, that soft, final sound of a deal dying, and in all that silence the click of it landed like a gavel. Rick had stopped smiling. And my sister sat there with 18 months of paper in front of her and understood, all at once, that the one document she could never forge was the one I'd been carrying in a cigar box the whole time. I had one thing left. I set the silver recorder on the table, and I pressed play, and my father's voice came into that office, not the empty, courteous stranger in the rented bed, but him 4 years ago, clear and dry and a little annoyed at the machine. This is Walt Dawson, and I'm making this because I know my girl Dana, and I know that husband of hers, and I know what's going to happen to me. I've put the place in trust for Claire. Not because I love Dana less. Dana, if you're hearing this, you took care of me and I know what it cost you, and I'm sorry I was ever a burden to you. But you'd have sold it. Rick would have made you. And this land is the only thing I've got to give the girl who's been gone her whole life keeping other folks safe. Claire, the fence is holding. Come home. It's yours now. Don't let anybody tell you it isn't. Nobody said anything for a long moment. Even the forgery, even the theft, none of it was as loud as a dead, tired old man saying the fence is holding to a room full of people who'd tried to sell his fence. Dana was crying. Not the performed kind. And here is where the easy story wants her to be a villain, and I could have let her be one. But she looked at me across that table, and everything she'd carried came out at once. You were off being a hero, she said, and her voice cracked open. For 25 years. And I was here. I cleaned him. I fed him. I watched him look at me like a stranger every single day while you mailed him postcards from paradise and thought that made you a good daughter. And he still, she couldn't finish it. He still chose me. That was the wound. It had been the wound her whole life. And I have to tell you, sitting there, she was right. Not about the forgery. Not about the sale, or the money into Rick's hole, or the drawn tremor. Those were crimes, and I was not going to pretend they weren't. But about the years. She was right. I had been gone. I let a postcard do the work of a daughter, because a postcard could be mailed from Kandahar and a bedpan could not. She earned every sleepless hour of resentment she was throwing at me. I didn't hug her. I hadn't earned that, and it would have been a lie, and I'd just spent an afternoon in a room full of other people's lies. I said the only true thing I had. You're right that I wasn't here. I'll carry that. What you did for him at 3 a.m, I couldn't have done it, and I didn't. That's mine to live with. I took a breath, and found the next words, and let none of them get away. But being tired and being wronged does not give you the right to forge a dying man's name and sell the ground he's still breathing on. He didn't choose me over you, Dana. He chose the land over Rick's debt. He was protecting you from becoming exactly the person you became in this room. That's not a favor to me. That's the last thing he ever did for you. Okafor referred the forged documents to the district attorney's office that week. My father died 11 days later, in the rented bed in the good light, on a Tuesday, which felt right, because it was a Tuesday when Dana first told me not to come. I was there. For the last 11 days I was there. I fed him, and I read him his own old postcards out loud, the fence and the weather and the roan mare, and near the end he squeezed my hand once, and I'll never know if he knew it was me or just knew it was someone who wasn't leaving. I'll take it either way. I stayed those 11 days, and they were the only days of his dying I was there for, and I know exactly what that ratio is: 11 days against 3 years. A stamp against a bedpan, and I'm not going to dress it up. But I was there for those. I learned how he liked his pillows. I learned the sound he made when the pain medication was wearing thin. I read him the postcards, his own words back to him, and some afternoons I'd have sworn a corner of his mouth moved at the fence his holding, though the nurse told me kindly not to read too much into it, and I told her, just as kindly, that I'd been reading meaning into that man's fence reports for 22 years, and I wasn't about to stop on the last one. Dana didn't come, those 11 days. She knew I was there, and she stayed away, and I understood it, because she couldn't be in a room with me and the thing we both now knew. Manny came every day. He'd stand in the doorway with his hat in his hands and say, "How's he doing?" And I'd say, "He's comfortable," and Manny would nod and go feed the horses. The sale collapsed the moment Pruitt's attorney closed that folder. The trust held. The land is mine, which is to say it is my father's still, and I am only keeping it, the way he kept it, the way his father kept it before him. The forensic document examiner's report came back in March. Her phrase for the tremor on all 3 signatures was a simulated infirmity drawn, not lived, exactly what I'd read at that dining table months before. On March 19th, the Bandera County District Attorney filed 2 felony counts: forgery of a financial instrument and exploitation of an elderly individual, both real charges under Texas law. And the audit finally put a number on the quiet part: 214. 0 pulled from the ranch account across a dozen transfers in 18 months, nearly all of it chased into the hole under Rick's dead company. The Cedar Hollow sign came off the drive the same week the trust cleared. I did not enjoy a single moment of setting any of it into motion. It's a strange kind of winning, where the prize is your father's grave and the cost is your only sister. Because that's the cost, and I won't pretend it away. I got the ranch. I lost Dana, really lost her. Not the comfortable distance of a career spent far from home, but the real thing, a sister across a courtroom. And I got, in the same envelope, the worst gift and the best one. Proof, finally, in my father's own dry voice, of exactly how much he trusted me, delivered at the precise moment I could no longer thank him for it. Some doors open and stay closed at the same time. That's the one this story leaves open and shut. He told me he was proud. 4 years too late for me to say anything back. But I did not keep the ranch alone, and that's the part I hold on to. Manny Ruiz is still there. I made him a partner. In writing. The way my father should have done years ago, and the 2 horses nobody would sell have company now. Because I bought back a few head, and Manny runs them the way he's run everything on that place for 31 years. On Sunday mornings, the 2 of us walk the north line and check the fence. And it's holding, and we mean to keep it holding. He talks about my father the way you'd talk about a man who just stepped into the next room. I lost a sister across a courtroom, and there is a hole where she was, and I won't pretend there isn't. But I learned that the family you're left with is not always the family you were born into. Sometimes it's a man in a hat who fed 2 horses for 18 months that nobody was paying him to feed, because it was the right thing, and it wasn't going to be anybody else. Some things you rebuild. Some you build new. Manny and I are building new. I keep the postcards in the cigar box still. 261 of them. I framed a few, the Alamo one from basic training, the one about the roan mare's first foal, the fence that was always, somehow, holding. But the July one, the last one, the one with the torn spot and the safe combination, and you always did get the time wrong, that one I keep separate. In my wallet. Folded soft now. Because it is the smartest and bravest thing anyone has ever done for me. And it fit on a postcard. There's a thing I understand now that I want to hand you straight. Because it's the only lesson in this whole story, and I've paid for it. Sending is not the same as showing up. I spent 25 years believing that money in an account and a card in the mail added up to being present. And they didn't. My sister was right about that. And it cost me the years I can't get back, and very nearly cost me the man himself. Being there is a bedpan at 3 a.m, not a postcard from paradise. And I'll answer for the difference the rest of my life. But here is the other half. The half my father wrote on the back of a bluebonnet postcard with a torn spot and a shaking hand. The people who truly know you can trust you completely from 10,000 miles away, and sometimes the smallest, cheapest, most overlooked thing you ever kept turns out to be the one that tells the truth when every expensive document in the room is lying. They studied his signature. They forged his name. They had folders full of paper. And it all came apart because an old man mailed his daughter the fence report every month for 22 years. And she was the kind of person who kept them. I think about the Tremor. Some nights. His real one, the one that wandered and dragged and got worse when he was tired, against the one they drew on that bill of sale. So careful and so even and so perfect. That's the whole of it, isn't it? A lie has to be perfect, or it comes apart. The truth is allowed to shake. Give me a hand that trembles because it means it over a steady one that's pretending. Every day I've got left. If you've ever had family decide who you were while you weren't in the room to argue, if you've ever been told that the way you showed love didn't count, take this from a soldier who almost let a postcard be her whole goodbye, and go home while there's still someone there to be home for. Don't wait for the last card to tell you what it means. Stay a minute before you go. Tell me down in the comments where you're watching from and one small thing someone kept that turned out to mean everything. I'll read them. The fence is holding. Come home. I'm Claire Dawson. Master Sergeant, retired. Thank you for listening.